Picture this scene, because even now, months later, it plays in my head like a slow-motion car crash that you just can't look away from. It's 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of Tuesday that feels like a gift from the universe, with the Georgia sun filtering through the canopy of ancient pines, casting dappled shadows on the hood of my van. I'm Elijah Eli Brooks, 45 years old, a combat veteran who served 2 tours in the desert. Now just a tired IT consultant trying to unload a lifetime of boxes into a cabin that smells like cedar and memories. This place, nestled right on the edge of Lake Lanier, was supposed to be my sanctuary, a final gift from my late great-uncle Silas, the one place where the noise of a messy divorce and the grinding pressure of raising 2 teenagers as a single dad couldn't reach me. But peace, as I was about to learn, is a commodity that some people think they own the copyright to. And just as I'm wrestling a leather armchair out of the back of my van, I hear it, the crunch of gravel under tires that cost more than my entire vehicle. A pristine, pearl-white Range Rover pulls up, aggressive and sudden, kicking up dust that settles on my boots, and out steps a woman who I would soon come to know as the architect of my living nightmare, Cynthia Vance. She's looking at me over the rim of designer sunglasses, her hair a helmet of chemically perfect blonde stiffened by hairspray and entitlement. And before I can even offer a friendly wave, she's already dialing 911, her voice shrill enough to cut through the humid air as she tells the operator that there is a suspicious individual looting the Brooks estate. I tried to de-escalate, tried to show her the deed, the keys, the family photos. But to a woman like Cynthia, truth is flexible when it contradicts her worldview. 20 minutes later, I'm standing there with my hands visible, heart hammering a rhythm I hadn't felt since patrol days in Kandahar, while 2 exhausted deputies from the Hall County Sheriff's Office apologized to me after verifying my ID. All while Cynthia, the self-proclaimed Queen Bee and HOA president of Pineview Hollows, stands there fuming, not because she was wrong, but because the police didn't drag me away in cuffs. As she clicked away in her heels, muttering about neighborhood standards and property values, I realized this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a declaration of war, and I was standing on the battlefield without a weapon. To understand the absurdity of what happened next, you have to understand Pineview Hollows, a collection of 40-odd homes that time seemed to have forgotten, occupied mostly by retirees and weekenders from Atlanta who just wanted to fish and drink iced tea on their porches. My uncle Silas bought this plot back in the 60s when it was just dirt and potential, building the A-frame cabin with his own hands. But somewhere along the line, Cynthia arrived, bringing with her a regime of terror disguised as community management. She measured grass height with a ruler, she fined people for the wrong shade of beige on their siding, and she ruled the homeowners association like it was her own personal fiefdom, flanked by her husband Arthur, a quiet, beaten-down man who looked like he'd been apologizing for his wife's behavior for 3 decades. The morning after the police incident, I'm sitting on my deck, sipping coffee and watching the mist roll off the water, thinking maybe the worst was over, when Cynthia reappears, this time wielding a clipboard like a shield. She doesn't say good morning, doesn't acknowledge the view, just thrusts a manila envelope into my chest, her perfume cloying and suffocating in the fresh air. It was a list of violations, 15 of them to be exact, citing everything from an unpermitted structure, my uncle's tool shed that had been there since the Reagan administration, to the commercial vehicle in the driveway, which was just my work van, totaling nearly $3,000 in fines due immediately. The audacity was breathtaking, a masterclass in bureaucratic bullying. But she made one critical mistake, assuming that because I was new, I was ignorant. I spent the afternoon digging through county records, the dust of the archives filling my lungs, only to find that every single citation was bogus. The shed was permitted, the van was legal, the generator she complained about was actually recommended by the county for rural properties. But when I tried to talk to my neighbors, I saw the real damage she had done, because sweet old folks like Old Man Miller and Mrs. Higgins next door wouldn't even look me in the eye when she was around, their fear palatable, a thick fog of intimidation that had silenced this community for years. That night, feeling the weight of isolation, I crawled into the crawl space under the cabin, looking for the main water shutoff, and my flashlight beam hit something that would change everything. 3 bankers' boxes labeled HOA Wars in Uncle Silas's shaky handwriting. It was a treasure trove, a legacy of resistance, containing 15 years of correspondence, legal threats, and detailed notes about Cynthia's harassment campaigns against previous neighbors. It turned out I wasn't her first victim, just the latest in a long line of people she had tried to force out. But as I was reading a letter where she threatened to sue a family for having a basketball hoop, my phone buzzed with a call from Julian, my buddy from law school who works corporate law in Buckhead. "Eli," he said, his voice cracking with that specific kind of lawyer excitement. "You're not going to believe this, but I ran a check on your HOA because the bylaws you sent me looked dated, and it turns out the Pineview Hollows Community Association hasn't filed their annual registration with the Georgia Secretary of State since 2021. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the realization that Cynthia had been issuing fines, collecting dues, and terrorizing residents for years under the banner of an organization that, legally speaking, didn't even exist. Armed with this knowledge, I walked into the emergency meeting Cynthia had called at the community center a few days later, a sterile room smelling of floor wax and fear, where 12 anxious residents sat on metal folding chairs while Cynthia lectured them about the criminal element infiltrating their safe haven. She didn't use my name, but her eyes bored into me, cold and hard as flint, until I stood up, feeling the adrenaline surge, and dropped the stack of state registry printouts on the table. "Actually," I said, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest, "let's talk about the criminal element of collecting money for a fake organization, because according to state law, every fine you've issued in the last 2 years is fraud." The room erupted, not with anger at me, but with the sudden, sharp intake of breath from people realizing they'd been duped, and even Arthur, usually silent in the back, looked up with a flash of panic that told me he knew. He knew, and he was terrified. But Cynthia didn't buckle. She doubled down, accusing me of fabricating documents, her face twisting into a mask of desperate rage. And that's when I knew this wasn't just about control. It was about survival for her. The retaliation was swift and brutal, moving from petty neighborhood disputes to a direct attack on my livelihood. 2 days later, my biggest client, a medical group in Atlanta, called to suspend my contract because they'd received anonymous tips claiming I was operating without a business license and storing stolen server equipment. Then came the social media smear campaign, posts on local community pages warning about a dangerous individual with a history of violence, forcing me to spend hours doing damage control, showing my credentials, proving I wasn't a threat. I was drowning in defense, reacting to her every move, until one night, Old Man Miller crept over to my porch through the shadows, holding a plate of cookies like a peace offering, and whispered, "It's not just power, son, it's money. She's broke, and she's trying to flip these houses because she's leveraged up to her eyeballs." That was the missing piece, the key to the puzzle. Cynthia wasn't just a Karen. She was a desperate real estate speculator whose house of cards was falling, and I was the obstacle standing between her and a payday. The revelation that Cynthia Vance was operating out of financial desperation rather than just pure malice didn't make her less dangerous. If anything, it made her as volatile as a cornered animal. Old Man Miller's intel was confirmed when I found the public records of tax liens against her properties and noticed that her real estate license was already under review for aggressive solicitation. She needed me to crack, to sell cheap so she could flip the cabin and cover her mounting debts. But she had severely underestimated the stubbornness of a man who had been trained to hold the line when everything is falling apart. The escalation began with psychological warfare, the kind designed to make you question your own sanity. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. to the sound of a diesel engine idling outside my window, only to run out and find the street empty, the smell of exhaust hanging in the air like a phantom. Then came the surveyors, a crew of rough-looking men in unmarked trucks who started pounding "No trespassing" stakes 10 feet into my lawn, claiming they were marking HOA common ground. It took me pulling out the original plat maps from Uncle Silas's war chest and physically standing in front of their post-hole diggers to make them back off. But the message was clear. She was trying to shrink my world, inch by inch. But the real turning point, the moment the game changed from checkers to 3D chess, happened during a visit to the county clerk's office in Gainesville. I was there to file a harassment complaint when a clerk, a woman named Ms. Patty who had likely been stamping deeds since the Carter administration, squinted at my property line on the microfiche and said, Honey, you know you own the road, right? I froze, the hum of the overhead fluorescent lights suddenly deafening. It turned out that back in 1987, Uncle Silas hadn't just bought the land for the cabin. He had purchased the strip of land that constituted the only paved access road leading to the 3 houses at the end of the peninsula, including the Vance estate. The deed contained a specific easement clause, a good neighbor provision that Uncle Silas must have added with a smirk, stating that the right-of-way was conditional upon the maintenance of civil relations and the absence of malicious interference. It was a legal landmine that had been dormant for 40 years, waiting for someone to step on it, and Cynthia had just been dancing on the trigger. I didn't play the card immediately. I let her think she was winning. I let her escalate, knowing that every false police report and every act of vandalism was just more ammunition for the revocation filing. And escalate she did. One evening, I came home to find my backup generator's fuel tank capped with a sugary sludge, a sabotage attempt that would have destroyed the engine if I hadn't checked the filters, a habit drilled into me by years of motor pool inspections. Then came the surveillance. I installed high-definition cameras in the trees, disguised as birdhouses, capturing the nightly visits of a dark sedan that would slow roll past my driveway. The driver's face obscured, but the license plate clearly registered to Arthur Vance. The tension in the neighborhood was palpable, a physical weight pressing down on everyone. Mrs. Higgins stopped walking her dog past my house, terrified of being seen associating with the enemy, but secretly, she began dropping off envelopes in my mailbox, copies of illegal invoices, threatening letters Cynthia had sent to other families, a dossier of extortion. It all culminated on a Thursday night that started with a thunderstorm and ended with a SWAT team in my living room. I was asleep when the front door burst open, the blinding beams of tactical lights cutting through the darkness, voices screaming at me to get on the ground. Someone had called in a hostage situation, claiming a veteran was having a psychotic break and holding his children at gunpoint. My kids weren't even there that weekend, thank God. But for 20 terrifying minutes, I was face down on my own floor, handcuffed, praying that a twitch wouldn't get me killed. When the dust settled and the adrenaline faded into cold fury, Deputy Rodriguez, the one cop in the county who actually had a brain, pulled me aside, his face grim. "This call came from a burner phone," he said quietly. "But they knew the layout of your house, Eli. They knew exactly where the bedrooms were. This was targeted. That was the line. They had crossed from harassment into endangering my life." And looking at the flashing blue lights reflecting off the wet pavement, I realized that playing defense was over. I wasn't just going to file a complaint. I was going to dismantle her entire world. The next morning, I met Arthur in the back booth of a greasy spoon diner off the highway. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a decade, his hands shaking as he held his coffee cup. "She's going to lose the house anyway," he whispered, tears tracking through the stubble on his cheeks. "She's borrowed against everything, Eli. She thinks if she can just get your property, she can bundle it with ours and sell it to a developer for a resort. She's not evil. She's drowning, and she's pulling me down with her." "Arthur," I said, sliding a document across the chipped Formica table, "I'm going to revoke the easement. In 30 days, your driveway becomes my private property. No cars, no trucks, no moving vans. Your house becomes landlocked. It'll be worth zero." He stared at the paper, the color draining from his face, and for a second I thought he might pass out. But then, a strange thing happened. He exhaled a long, shuddering breath and looked me in the eye. "Do it," he said. "It's the only way this stops. If you cut off the road, she can't flip the houses. The scheme dies. Just promise me you won't let her go to prison." I didn't promise him that, because I wasn't sure I could stop the train that was already barreling down the tracks, but I nodded. The trap was set, the evidence was compiled, and the road, the literal and metaphorical path she had used to terrorize this community, was about to be pulled out from under her feet. The showdown didn't happen in a courtroom, but in the sweltering heat of the Pineview Hollows Community Center, packed so tight with bodies that the air conditioner was wheezing just to keep up. It was the night of the regularly scheduled HOA meeting, or what Cynthia still pretended was a legitimate meeting, and word had spread like wildfire. Everyone was there. The terrified retirees, the young families who had been bullied into silence, and standing in the back like a sentinel, Deputy Rodriguez. Cynthia stood at the podium, looking brittle and manic, her perfectly applied makeup unable to hide the frantic darting of her eyes. She launched into her usual tirade, proposing a special assessment fee of $5,000 per household to cover legal defense against disruptive residents, meaning me. The room rumbled with dissent, a low growl of anger that she tried to shout over, banging her gavel like a judge in a kangaroo court. That's when I stood up. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just walked to the front of the room, flanked by Julian in his three-piece suit and Old Man Miller holding the original survey maps. There won't be any assessments, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. Because as of this morning, I have filed a motion to revoke the easement granting access to the properties at the end of Lakeside Drive due to violation of the Good Neighbor Clause. I projected the document onto the wall behind her, a massive, blown-up image of the deed from 1987. You see, Cynthia, you don't live on a public road. You live on a private drive that belongs to the Brooks estate. And since you've engaged in a documented campaign of harassment, filing false police reports, and attempted fraud, I'm taking my road back. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum where sound used to be. Cynthia laughed, a brittle, high-pitched sound. You can't do that. It's illegal. You're lying. It's not illegal. Arthur's voice rang out from the back, and the crowd parted as he walked forward, carrying the box, the real box of financial records he'd been hiding in his fishing tackle. And neither is the evidence of the $50,000 you embezzled from the community fund to pay the mortgage on our investment properties. Cynthia looked at her husband, the man she had bullied for 30 years, and for the first time, I saw the fight leave her body. She slumped against the podium, a puppet whose strings had been cut, realizing that her empire of dirt was crumbling in front of the very people she had terrorized. Deputy Rodriguez stepped forward then, cuffs jingling, citing the multiple counts of filing false reports and the fraud investigation that was now open thanks to Julian's work with the DA. But as the handcuffs clicked, a sound that was more satisfying than I cared to admit, I stopped them. I looked at the broken woman, then at Arthur, who was weeping silently, and then at the neighbors who were watching with a mix of vengeance and pity. Wait, I said. We can do this the hard way, where you go to jail and lose everything. Or, we make a deal. The deal was simple. Cynthia resigns immediately. The fake HOA is dissolved. A new, voluntary neighborhood association is formed with Old Man Miller as interim president. And in exchange for keeping the road easement open so they could sell their house and avoid bankruptcy, they had to leave. Immediately, she signed the papers with a shaking hand, her legacy of control evaporating with the ink. 6 months later, Pineview Hollows is unrecognizable. The fear is gone, replaced by the smell of barbecue grills and the sound of kids playing in yards that used to be off-limits. Cynthia and Arthur moved to a condo in Florida. I heard she's in therapy, and he's finally taking painting classes. My cabin is finished, a beautiful blend of my uncle's history and my future, and on weekends, my kids fish off the dock while I sit with Old Man Miller, drinking coffee that tastes like victory. We won. But looking back at the wreckage, the near ruin of a family, the swatting, the years of stress, I have to ask, was it justice, or was it just necessary cruelty? When does fighting for your rights cross the line into destroying someone else, even if they deserve it? We pushed a woman to the brink to save our community, and yeah, she was the villain of this story, but seeing Arthur cry that night still haunts me. But then I look at the lake, calm and glass-like under the Georgia sky, and I think, maybe peace is worth the price of a little ruthless strategy. What would you have done? Would you have let her rot in a cell, or was the mercy of letting them leave the ultimate power move? Let me know in the comments, because around here, the only thing we judge now is the size of the base on the line.
Alright, and that is for today's videos. I hope you enjoyed it and found something useful. If you did, don't forget to like, subscribe and share it with your friends. Let me know your thoughts in the comment below. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.